So I promised my family that I'd be done referencing sports in my sermons. So I'm not talking about the Super Bowl, but I will talk about the halftime show. It's the only part I watched. If you watched it live or caught the highlights later on, you'll know already that Jennifer Lopez and Shakira, both incredibly talented Latina singers, songwriters, dancers, and producers, to name a few of their accolades, put on a spectacular performance with energy and immense stamina. I mean, I was getting tired just watching them. They pulled out all of the stops, creating a visual spectacle designed to take people's breath away with lights and explosions and smoke and about a dozen costume changes and hundreds of dancers, musicians, and choristers. It was a sight to behold. What it wasn't was something designed for the radio. The Super Bowl halftime show is a visual experience. It would be weird if leading up to the big day, producers and advertisers were heard promoting the radio take or the podcast of the upcoming halftime show. Wait till you get a load of this extravaganza. It's Jenny from the block and Shakira. Her hips do not lie. Tune your dial and listen in. It's just weird, right? That's not right at all. The Super Bowl halftime show would make a lousy audiobook. And yet, it kind of happens here in Mark chapter 9. The halftime moment in the gospel, and arguably one of the Bible's grandest visual light shows of glory. Blinding light, smoke machine like clouds, 2 all-star guest appearances, and the main attraction lit up like the 4th of July. Like a divine announcer, God's voice booms through the cloud cover, and what we expect to hear is something along the lines of, "This is my son whom I love. Look at him. Just look. Isn't this display something? Check out this light show. Put your hands together for shiny Jesus." No, instead we get, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Listen. It's a Super Bowl halftime show, but just close your eyes and listen. Throw a blanket over the TV if you have to. Just use your ears. Jesus was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." The story of the Transfiguration follows on the heels of a crucial conversation between Jesus and his disciples. And so often we only focus on the story of the Transfiguration of Jesus on the mountain on this Sunday. Rarely do preachers take the opportunity to reach back and pick up the context behind this story. But let's do that today, shall we? Let's go back to Mark 8. 6 days before the Transfiguration, Mark tells us that Jesus and his crew were in Caesarea Philippi, a capital city built by Philip to honor the emperor who had given him this particular area to rule. It was famous for a temple to the pagan god Pan. The word, not Pam, Pan with an N. Pam got really excited there for a minute. I'm going to pay for that this week. It was well known for the worship of Baal and the cult of emperor worship. In other words, this was a city built to celebrate worldly power and domination. So it's fascinating that here in essentially the Washington, D.C. of Palestine, Jesus accepts the Hebrew designation of Messiah, the chosen one, the anointed one, who fulfills God's ancient promise to King David that God will establish David's throne forever. Here in the Dubai, in the Abu Dhabi of the ancient world, Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, the exalted apocalyptic figure from Daniel 7, who will come on the clouds of heaven to be given dominion over all. Well, absolutely, why not? Kind of the perfect place, isn't it? You can almost hear the disciples scoffing at the false worldly displays of power all around them, knowing that they are riding with the Messiah of God, who for sure is about to light it all up. But in the next breath, Jesus sucks the air out of the room by attaching to all these symbols of greatness, power, and domination the totally contradictory picture of rejection, suffering, and a cross. The whiplash for the disciples here is palpable. A tectonic shift in the ground beneath their feet. What did you just say, Jesus? You see, the disciples, they've been around him for a few years now. They've traveled alongside him, ate, slept, laughed, and cried alongside of him. They've listened to his words, seen his miracles, watched him pray, and witnessed his authority. So when out of the blue, Jesus asks them, "Who do people think I am?" They don't make much of the question. They were confident in their answers. "Well, we haven't tallied all of the survey results yet, Jesus. But at first glance, it looks like you've got the popular vote. People generally align you with the traditions of the great prophets, whom God has appointed as spokespersons for his message to Israel, the likes of John and Elijah and such. Great work, keep it up, Jesus." And then he stops and looks at his disciples and says, "But what do you think? Who do you say that I am?" And I imagine there might have been a few moments of embarrassed silence. The disciples collected their thoughts, possibly even afraid to make their personal speculations public. So as they're sort of shifting their feet, staring at the ground, leave it to Peter. Peter jumps at the mic. I think he's one of those people that is just profoundly uncomfortable with silence. Do you know those type of, anyway, it doesn't matter. So he steps up, he takes the mic and proclaims, "You are the Messiah." Brilliant, gold star, Peter, way to go. But behind his good answer was a whole lot of confused thinking and, frankly, wrong-headed definitions as to what that even meant. Peter had stars in his eyes as he proclaimed Jesus as the Christ. He and the others could already envision the posts of honor and glory that they would occupy when Jesus brought in the kingdom by chasing out the Romans and reestablishing the halcyon days of David and Solomon to the people of Israel. And I imagine the pit of Jesus' stomach sort of falling out as he witnessed the blossoming of their joy. Jesus had to deliver his friends, had to deliver his disciples from their starry-eyed Messiah complex. So he very quickly proceeds to tell them all in stark, horrific detail what it actually means for him to be Messiah. He will undergo great suffering and mass rejection, after which he will be brutally and publicly murdered. Gobsmacked. They didn't even hear or couldn't even absorb what Jesus said after that. The roar in Peter's ears was so great that he didn't even catch the part about rising again or 3 days, because everything within him was raging against that first part of what Jesus had said. It would be an understatement to say that Peter was appalled, presumably along with the rest of the disciples. Nothing had prepared them for this. But not wanting to embarrass Jesus in front of the others, Peter protectively sort of takes him aside to rather forcibly straighten him out. "What a stupid thing to say, Jesus. Everyone knows that kind of thing doesn't happen to God's Messiah. It's ridiculous. You're going to ruin morale here. Snap out of it." But now it's Jesus' turn to be appalled. In fact, he's hopping mad. What Peter wanted to be this sort of private reprimand, Jesus turns into a public put-down. He turns to the rest of the disciples, voices trembling, points to Peter and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And then I hope, a little less harshly, he said, "You are setting your mind not on God, but on human ideas and expectations." You see, here's the thing. What we have here is not just that Jesus is correcting some mistaken ideas the disciples have about messiahship. He's not just making some heady theological point. In hearing Peter's rebuke, Jesus has once again heard the voice of the tempter in his ear, the voice that haunted him when he was alone, fasting in the wilderness. "Bow down to me, and all these kingdoms of the world could be yours." You see, the cross for Jesus was not just some divinely assigned destiny. It was a choice. Jesus, fully human as any one of us, had to choose moment by moment, day after day, right up to the very eve before his crucifixion. He had to choose to accept the full implication of his messiahship. It was never assumed, never automatic, never easy. He was daily tempted to be another kind of Messiah, one that was powerful and valorized and admired and victorious. And now here in Caesarea Philippi, a city built to display worldly power and domination, from his very own disciples, his best friend, he hears those tempting words. It's Jesus who is caught off guard, who has the wind knocked out of him. He realizes that how he responds has tremendous implications, not just for him, but for them. He draws a line in the sand and says, "Do you still want to follow me?" Because this is what it really means. Not power, not fame, not riches, not popularity. It means rejection and a wooden cross. Do you still want to follow me? Because if so, it means you are also going to have to take up your own cross. And this is the first time in Mark's gospel that Jesus uses that word, the cross. And we know first things matter in the Gospels. Take up your cross. It's the first time it's mentioned in this gospel. Take up your cross and follow me. He compares being his disciples to a terrible, though familiar image to them, of a condemned man carrying the beam of a cross on his shoulders to the place of his own execution. That's what discipleship looks like. Following me, Jesus says, means self-denial, not self-fulfillment. It means self-sacrificing love, not self-actualizing power. It means giving up our lives in order to find our true self in the kingdom of God. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote in Call of Discipleship, what Jesus bids is to come and die. And that's what the disciples have to be prepared for. Jesus needs to correct their lens, to correct any complex they had developed, wrong ideas about who the Messiah was to be, for his own sake as much as for theirs. Who do you say that I am? Now let me explain to you what that's going to look like. So it was 6 days after that turning point conversation. It was 6 days later. It was on the 7th day. And they're on a mountaintop. and Jesus gets lit up like the 4th of July. Guest appearances by both Moses and Elijah, powerhouses of the Jewish faith. Cloud covers them all, a sure sign that the creator of the cosmos is present. It's the halftime show in Mark's gospel. Tensions are high, and there's still a lot of game left. Time for a show to boost morale and get the juices flowing. Perfect. Perfect. Peter must have been thinking, now this is what I'm talking about. Look at this. Look at him. That's our boy Jesus. There's a powerful, glorified Messiah that we're following. Yes. Wait till Rome gets a look at this guy. When out of the cloud comes a voice of God, silencing Peter's hysteria. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Just listen. When the disciples pull themselves up from being flattened on the ground, everything is quiet. The clouds, Moses, Elijah, the shining light, all of it's gone. There's only Jesus in his usual tunic. Nothing fancy, nothing shiny or glorious, just Jesus. What do we make of all this then? It is a perplexing story. I would guess that, like the earliest disciples, we're torn, a little confused about it all. Our notion of the mighty Messiah of God would be much more like what the disciples saw on the mountaintop. Jesus in all of his glory, shining bright and dazzling white. Shine, Jesus, shine. At the Transfiguration, we are convinced of his holiness. But are we as convinced when we see him gasping for breath, dying on the cross? Do we look away then? Seeing the dazzling white engulfing Jesus on the mountain, we feel assured. However, seeing the dark red of blood streaming down his face at Calvary, we maybe aren't so sure. When we see Moses and Elijah at Jesus' side, we know he's really someone special. But when he's dying on the cross, flanked by 2 convicted criminals, we have to wonder. We applaud at the voice of God at the top of a mountain, proclaiming Jesus to be the beloved, the Son. However, at Golgotha, at the city dump where Jesus is crucified, we hear nothing. The utter silence of Good Friday. And we might start to wonder. It's just all so confusing. On the mountain, it feels so easy to believe. At the cross, it feels next to impossible. We want a Messiah of power, not a man dying a humiliating, painful death. But it really shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been so difficult at the cross. Jesus had told them about it numerous times before the event. They just didn't listen. Which is why God is so adamant. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Here's the truth of it, folks. We talk about having our eye on the prize, but our eyes can be quite deceiving. What looks like failure, a man dying on a cross, is actually glory. Here in this in-between place, this mountaintop transfiguration, we find ourselves transitioning from a season of light and epiphany and revelation to the season of Lent, season of fasting, of praying and intense discipleship. 40 days it will take us to the foot of Jesus' cross, witnessing him taking his last breath. Up to this point, our minds have been enlightened, but for the next 6 weeks, things are going to grow increasingly dark. So perhaps in this in-between place, we're invited to switch our primary sense from sight to sound, from looking to listening. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Listen to his words. Listen to his promises. Listen, because your eyes are about to deceive you. The halftime show is over. There's work to do. It's not going to look like what you think it's going to look like. In fact, it's going to get very dark and very ugly. Don't let your eyes deceive you. You want to follow me? Listen. It's not going to be razzle-dazzle. It's going to be bloody. No smoke and light on a mountaintop, only Jesus impaled on a spit of wood at the place of the skull. Not a display of worldly power, but of divine submission. That's glory. Looks can be deceiving, so listen. You need to listen to me now, says Jesus. Listen to my voice and remember what I'm saying to you, because it's going to get real dark. But listen for my voice. We're going to walk through the shadow of death. Listen. Take up your cross if you want to follow me, but listen to your shepherd's voice. 3 days, remember, 3 days, listen. Hear him say, "It is accomplished." Welcome to the season of Lent. Are you listening? To God be all the glory. Amen.